Welcome to the Introspective Collective podcast. Today's topic is Black Lives Matter and Black-owned land matters too.
Well, hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us. Today, the topic that I want to bring to our podcast, Black Lives Matter and Black Land Matters Too. So, in honor of our Juneteenth holiday, which long time coming, I thought about this topic. I read this book, Freedom Farmers by Dr. Monica White. And I mean, when I think about how we as Black folks, African Americans, we've bought into Black Lives Matter. And as Black Lives Matter, we think about IRC, Introspective Collective Podcast represents IRC, which stands for Individuals, Relationships, and Communities. So as we think about Black Lives Matter, how are we as individuals reflecting that our lives matter? How do we, in our relationships, reflect that Black Lives Matter, and also in our communities? Yes, no one would argue our communities are in crisis in many of the large cities. And when we think about where our elders and families to help support our young folks as we navigate this difficult time, there are many people who are out here on the front lines looking to make a difference. And we all need to see ourselves as maybe reaching out, teaching one, each one teach one. I think it's important that we understand, as our dear sister Oprah said, Superman is not coming. You know,
Funny and not, but true.
But we have to do it. I also think about the chai, and that's a seminal series that looks at how do we BIPOC people take control of our communities. Not to go into too much detail of the chai, but think about when that small group of people started a outreach program to address the violence in our communities. It wasn't about calling the police. And they were I know this is a series, but the series is based on a concept that many of us may not know. And that's why I want to talk about this. In our collective history, we know about the contributions that many of our famous ancestors have made. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, W.E.B. Du Bois. But how much is known about Fannie Lou Hamer? And the reason I bring up Fannie Lou Hamer, she talks about collectivism. How do we as a collective support ourselves and our communities? So I'm going to try to not go too deep, but one of the most interesting aspects that I learned about Fannie Lou Hamer was that she spearheaded, with many others, the Freedom Farm Collective, FFC. And while, the thought of farming is a little foreign to me, but think about it. Our ancestors, those enslaved Africans, they were the first agricultural tenders of this land.
Yes.
True? By no means am I disregarding who the First Nation people are, because they own and lived on this land in North America. However, the mass productions of the agricultural community that was born on our ancestors' labor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm trying to make the connections. If we truly understand the labor of our ancestors on plantations and farms, we are the first agricultural tenders of this land through the mass production of different crops. Okay.
Yes.
And so when we think about, I'm just trying to bring it all together so we can have this conversation. When we think about after slavery ended and what were our options as a free people? Well, based on the system that was created at the end of slavery, we had options that were very few. Were we going to be sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and those that chose to migrate to the cities for, manufacturing? We lost our connection to the land. And what we understand is that, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, if you have a piece of land, you have a home, and you have a small plot of ground to grow your food so that you could become self-sufficient. We've
Mm-hmm.
lost that. We've
Yep.
lost that.
Yes.
And so when we think about Black Lives Matter, well, Black land ownership matters, and understanding the history of land ownership, that was part of, did you have a voice to vote?
Hmm.
Okay. And some people who understood that, they did their best to own land. Okay. And as you own land, then you had a voice, you had a stake to vote because you owned a piece of land. So understanding that when we say Black land ownership matters, yeah, it does. And while the system was, we were supposed to have 40 acres in a mule,
Yes.
understand why was that 40 acres a part of the settlement? Because it was thought that if we had our own land, just like the land grab in the Midwest, if you all haven't read your history books, look at Yellowstone. Check out Yellowstone. That was the biggest land grab in this nation's history. And so if we think about why did those things happen for land ownership? Because with land ownership, there is freedom.
And wealth.
And wealth. Okay. So when we talk about understanding our connection to the land, we also can take another leap to understand when we own land, we can choose what we do with that land. And to some extent, maybe we can profit from land ownership. Wealth is created from land ownership, correct?
Absolutely.
So bringing that to the present, when we think about, are we homeowners? Okay. Are we interested in investment property? See, here's where that wealth come in. And for many people who didn't understand Black Wall Street, that was there where people owned their land, where people owned businesses, where they developed their own economy.
Yep.
Because we know that when we spend money in other people's businesses, how much of that
goes back to our community.
Goes back into our community.
Right.
Well, part of the Freedom Farm Collective took that understanding and created wealth and employment within our own communities. The Freedom Farm Collective would identify, okay, let's have this X number of plots where we can grow our own food and be self-sufficient, and then the rest of our farming we can sell at the marketplace, and then that money reinvests in our own community. At one point, Fannie Lou Hamer and the Freedom Farm Collective, they actually had housing for folks who needed transitional housing, created pathways to home ownership, created collectives for if you wanted to become a beautician or a skilled laborer, apprentice. That all was held in our own community. We're missing that mark right now. Some of us, yes, there are some great institutions where we are developing our own skilled labor, where we are helping others become home owners. But I want to bring it back to the individual and to why the land connection matters. And I'm going to start with this one. Do we know the origins of our food?
Good
Now,
question.
now, let's think about that. Isn't the new movement knowing the origins of your food, farm to table? Isn't that the new mantra now?
Yeah.
It is
Okay.
farm fed or organic or
There you go.
right.
Now, okay, we have, and I won't mention names, but we have one large grocery store chain that talks about we're only organic. We only sell organic things, right? Products. Okay, we can trust that they're telling us the truth, and we're paying a premium to purchase their goods. Okay. Now,
Yes.
let's also just step back a moment. What if we could grow certain crops? You don't need much land. You could even have a balcony in an apartment, and you could grow your own seasonings like basil,
Dill.
dill. You could
Thyme,
grow
yep.
thyme. You could grow these seasonings without having a big plot of land.
It's funny you mentioned that. My mom about 5 years ago has a very small area of area in her yard that she's designated to doing just that. And out of that, I'm just going to say it's like a 12 by 12 space.
Yes.
And all of the thyme, the dill, different types of cabbages, tomatoes, things of that nature, okra, she grows. It's amazing how much she grows in that small little area.
Yep.
Of food that she uses for herself, but she also gives away a lot of it to either neighbors or family members, friends, things of that nature. But just to your point, the appreciation for land, and then what we can do for ourselves with a small piece of land.
Exactly. Exactly. I know here in Philadelphia, there are freedom farmers, freedom urban farmers. There are so many people here that are looking and seeking to develop crops and small crops. It only takes a few plants, and the yield is abundant, can feed multiple families, individuals. And so when we think about that, I too am involved in having little baskets where I'm growing some basil, because understanding the healing properties of basil, you can mix that in your smoothies, which can generate wellness by having a healthier diet. You think about tomatoes, which if you are able to have 1 or 2 tomato plants or cucumber plants, thinking of those items that you can have on your dinner table or take for lunch, rather than depending on processed foods. It doesn't have to say, I'm not saying to anyone, oh, everyone should become vegetarians. or vegans. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but think about if we had access at just for a little bit of labor or the amount that seeds could cost,
Mm-hmm.
we could grow items that we could use in our daily diet.
Mm-hmm.
So true.
You know, eliminating to whatever degree that you can processed foods, going to the corner store for a snack. We could create a healthy snack. I'm
True.
not saying eliminating going out and eating or doing anything, but how about increasing healthier food items
True.
in our family's table? That goes to wellness. And sometimes doing those healthier steps, we also reduce some of the chronic ailments that plague our communities.
True.
Wow, Paula, you've said so much. You've tapped into an awesome subject here. That and what you've done was you gave us some history and you brought it forward.
Mm-hmm.
But what you did is you went right to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And these are practical solutions that anyone, just about anyone, can do, right? The truth is, even if you don't have land, I've seen people take pots,
Yep.
or they've taken bins and they
Yep.
put the soil and they plot it and they grow, different plants, right?
Yep.
Or different foods or spices.
Yep.
But I'm just going back. I can't help how you started when we were talking about no slight to the natives who are already here, but when they were bringing from West Africa, right, transatlantic here, there were a lot of people who had their own ways of cultivating over in Africa.
Yes.
And on the way over, they would
Mm-hmm.
take spices and
Yes.
rices and they would tie in their hair
Exactly.
and bring over to this land here. And we were responsible largely for teaching the plantation owners how to plant and cultivate various crops.
Exactly.
They used us as the labor, of course, but they didn't have the ingenuity how to do it.
Exactly.
We brought a lot of those customs here, and they moving forward took the technology and created mega companies, right? Generational companies, whether it was sugar or there's a rice
Yep.
called in South Carolina, it's like a yellow rice or a
Yep.
golden rice
Yep.
that was created. And there's companies that are, years and years later who have profited off of our ingenuity.
Exactly. And
Uh,
and to your point, before I lose that, there were slave traders who knew which tribes
mm,
to capture and bring here because of their agricultural skills.
Mm-hmm.
how about that? Yes, yes. The second thing you made me think of is post-slavery, right? So-called slavery, 1864, right? The Emancipation Proclamation. And then you did have the Freedmen's Bureau that came along in order to teach certain skills,
Yep.
to the Black and poor. And we took those skills and we built communities, like Rosewood and Wall Street.
Yep.
And I can't help but mention that no, we didn't all get our 40 acres and a mule, and that every time we made progress, there's always a pushback, right? So if you
Yep.
look at progress throughout our history, it's not like they freed us, we learned these skills, and then we could just move forward and thrive, right?
Right.
Yep.
Because we were very creative and had ingenuity and had the will to build communities, but as soon as our white counterparts saw the progress, they sought to either stop the wholesaler from working with us, or burn the whole business down, or burn the whole community down, right? So, and then what they would do over the years, like they did with Wall Street, they decide to take graves, take communities,
Mm-hmm.
push them down, build roadways and highways over them. So
Mhm.
land that was ours, they not only just took it, or they would have a technicality or they would use a term called eminent domain.
Yes.
We want to take a road and we want to build right through your community, and we need this land. So they would put these laws in place that would make it easy to access the little land that we did acquire.
Exactly.
And what comes to mind as you're saying that, Preston, is the series that just recently ended. Queen Sugar is a prime example of some of the things that you're describing for whomever
Right.
were
Yes.
watchers of that
Yep.
series.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. And so just to finish up, I'm coming through history. I'm following you back through history. And so, we move through time and space. And I want to just make the point that every time we do make progress, there's always a pushback. Laws get changed to make it more difficult for us to move forward, right? And of course, it's always about controlling the narrative of the least fortunate. And so it's not that we didn't even have a concept of land and the benefits of land and have the ingenuity to create businesses of our own and communities of our own, but it's always coming out of a deficit, right? It's always coming out of an attack, either legally with the paper or physically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we move forward, and yes, our communities have become disassociated with the land and the value of the land.
Yeah.
Right. As a larger community. And so I'm moving forward now to where you left us off, is you're giving us practical solutions that deal with getting some, appreciating land ownership, whether it's 10 acres of land or whether it's a half an acre of land, right?
Exactly.
You build wealth through your land. You can create business through your land. You can create food that is healthy and good for you, that has medicinal purposes.
Exactly.
That can benefit you. And so
Exactly.
that's something that's practical that anyone can do. And so I really appreciate, that point that you went right to the solution. You're getting us some practical solutions in order to deal with this problem.
Yeah. And I just want to, to add to what comes to mind for me when we look at Black owned land, or if we look at, Black land ownership, is that to financial literacy. And I know that's kind of veering off in another topic, but I believe it relates to this topic too.
Necessary.
So that, how do we start preparing? We'll say to young people, if we're looking at, as they're also preparing for, when they transition, we're at that time of year of people graduating, whether they're graduating from high school or college. Where's the preparation for, like, okay, now that what is the next step? And it's nothing wrong with renting. I think all of us have been there at some point in time, but kind of preparing the young people to say, okay, what financial literacy, how are you money management?
Hey,
What
there you go.
financial goals so that you can acquire? Because that is the buzzword, generational wealth. You hear people talking about it all the time, but what are the steps to take so that you can be in that position to create generational wealth? And part of it, as leading back to the topic, is ownership, land ownership. So, somewhere as parents, even if we had to learn the hard way, it's an opportunity to teach our children how to do it differently so that they can be prepared as an individual. Sometimes looking back and seeing our parents struggle and say, okay, how can what is the takeaway, positive or negative, that now that I can implement those changes so that I can be in a better position financially, that even to come back and even help our parents if that's the case, but so that we can acquire that generational wealth by land ownership. And we see how that even relates to the housing market right now. I mean, hey, it's a seller's market. People were buying houses like $100,000 over asking price. Imagine that.
Wow.
So, this is a great topic.
Well, and I think each of you have pointed out, like, this is what is needed in our communities to understand financial literacy, because you're exactly right, as Desiree. Just reading some of the offerings that the Freedom Farm Collective would provide its members. You might pay a $5 dues, but you could sign up for workshops that taught you, how to balance a book, a checkbook, which who does that now? Do we
I get
even
it.
write checks? We don't even write checks anymore. And have we taught our children to write checks? I can remember my mother and father sitting me down and saying, this is how you write a check out.
Right.
But did they tell me how to balance the checkbook? Yeah, they said, just make sure you
Yeah,
have more
yeah.
coming in than you have going out.
and credit, hence the financial
Yeah,
literacy
right.
and money management.
Yes.
How do you
Right.
establish, and
Right.
not just establish it so you can buy the next pair of whatever, but
Right.
so that you can establish it so that you can be credit worthy when
Right.
it is time to
Right.
purchase a house.
Absolutely.
Right. But all we, but no disrespect to my ancestors. They
Yes,
did what
no
they thought was
disrespect,
best.
anyone. No
And yes,
disrespect.
no disrespect. But these are all parts of understanding Black Lives Matter. Well, our Black lives and Black knowledge matters.
True.
Yes,
Knowledge
yes.
of, we hear this maybe not as much, but when other folks, and I'm not being disrespectful when I say Caucasian people, they leave life insurance policies with the caveat, you can only receive this once you purchase your life insurance for the next generation. We leave a death certificate and figuring out, well, how we paying for the funeral? Many, not all of us.
It's not funny. I'm
Not
sorry.
all of us.
Not
Or
all
go,
of us.
or GoFundMe,
Right,
to bury
right.
somebody. Right.
And that's part of the financial literacy that we need, in addition to understanding, like you said, it was a land grab, it was a housing market, now it is a seller's market. And how are we to understand that? How do we understand that, yes, with land ownership becomes responsibilities, keeping your house up, making the needed repairs.
Yeah,
You
all
know
of
what
it.
I'm saying? All of this is what we need as a community to thrive and not just survive.
Well, you make me think of, we're always the tail end. When you think about gentrification,
There you go.
our property is always the property that gets bought up at a cheap, dirt cheap, with this urban planning over the next 5 or 10 years to build fabulous properties that will appraise and value as soon as they break ground, and we get pushed to wherever they decide to, push us to, in general, to live. So, right. Well, our community, why can't we have thriving communities that retain their value and appreciate over time?
Exactly. So as I bring this topic to a close, I do want to just give a simple quote, even though this is based on what was going on in Fannie Lou Hamer's time. We're talking about the mid 60s to early 70s. People don't realize this was a state that existed for many of our Southern brothers and sisters. And so this is credited to Fannie Lou Hamer. Freedom Farm collectives represented an opportunity to stay in the South rather than to be a part of the Great Migration from the South to the North. Freedom Farm collectives offered an opportunity for folks to live off the land and create a healthy community based on building an alternative food system as a cooperative and collective effort. That, I feel, represents how we as a people should consider, how can we create our own system? How do we create our own healthy alternatives? There's so much healing power in our own efforts to heal our community.
True.
Absolutely.
So that's all for this topic for today. Thank you for listening.